How to Eat Fried Worms, Thomas Rockwell, Chapter 20. Billy slumped at the kitchen table on one elbow, pawing in his bowl of Wheaties with his spoon. His mother was washing the breakfast dishes at the sink. But why isn't it good to eat hot dogs for breakfast? I know nobody does, but why don't they? Oh, Billy, said his mother, stop it. Finish your cereal. Well, but... A knock on the screen door. Billy's mother glanced around. Oh, hello, Alan. Joe? Is your sister better, Joe? Yes, thank you. Billy can't come out until he's finished his breakfast. Would you like to wait for him on the front porch? We came to see you, Mrs. Forrester. Oh, come on in. Mrs. Forrester, said Joe as Alan shut the door carefully behind him. I don't know if you know about it already, but see, about a week ago, Alan made this bet with Billy about eating worms. If Billy could eat 15 worms, one each day for 15 days, then... Billy, you're not still eating worms. Billy stuffed a spoonful of Wheaties into his mouth. Not just worms, Mom. I've been eating lots of other stuff too. Look at me. I'm healthy. Dr. McGrath told you the worms would not hurt me. But Billy, Dr. McGrath didn't think you were going to keep on eating worms. Joe nudged Alan and grinned. Aw, Mom, if 5 worms wouldn't hurt me, a few more won't either. They're little worms. Besides, it's a bet. They're big worms, Mrs. Forrester, said Joe, looking virtuous. We won't lie to you. My mother told me never to tell a lie. Manure, said Billy. Mom, it's a bet. I told you, if I win, Alan's got to pay me $50. $50? Young man, don't you move from that chair. She went off into the front hall. Thanks, whispered Billy, but you'll see, it won't work. Alan and Joe gazed nonchalantly at the ceiling. Billy's mother's voice came from the front hall. Dr. McGrath, I'm awfully sorry to bother you again. It's such a ridiculous matter. But since I spoke to you, Billy has continued to eat worms. No, it's nothing like that. He's acting perfectly normal otherwise. It seems he's made a bet with some other boys. One every day. He has to eat 15 to win his bet. Thank you, Dr. McGrath. I'm so sorry to bother you. She returned to the kitchen. But no more bets after this one, Billy. Alan and Joe, don't you egg him on anymore. He's far too eager to do wild things. Billy yucked silently at Joe and Alan. Alan made a rude gesture at him. Mrs. Forrester, said Joe, what we really came about is that Alan and me are going up to Lake Lauderdale today with my father to fish, and we won't be back until tomorrow night. So we wondered if you would make sure Billy eats the worms today and tomorrow. It's not that we don't trust Billy, Mrs. Forrester. No, said Billy's mother, smiling. But it's always better if there's a referee, you know, like Mr. Simmons says at school, to save arguments and hard feelings. We brought the 2 worms. He held up a paper bag. We boiled them already, so you can just keep them in the refrigerator. Well, said Billy's mother, this is quite a responsibility. Are you sure I'd be neutral enough to... I am his mother. Yeah, we thought of that. But we figured, well, you're usually pretty fair. And besides, parents almost never cheat kids if it's just something between kids. They're usually pretty fair until they get into it. Billy's mother laughed. And how does he eat them? Just cold, boiled? Well, we've been frying them, Mrs. Forrester. We roll them in cornmeal and then fry them like a fish. But he can do whatever he wants, except that Alan and me have decided it's not fair to make soup out of them or chop them all up like hash or chicken salad sandwich. He's got to eat them piece by piece. Who said? Yelled Billy. When was that ever in the rules? We said, shouted Alan. Billy jumped up, kicking his chair over. Well, then, I win, because it's cheating to make up new rules in the middle. Oh, yeah, shouted Alan. Then you lose because anybody knows it'd be cheating to hash it up. You think you're going to weasel out of it after I've eaten 9? Who's weaseling? You're cheating. Yeah, yeah. Boys, boys, Billy and Alan. Silence. Please. Now, Billy, no, let me speak first. I do think Alan and Joe are right. It wouldn't be fair to cut the worm all up. You can just think of some other ways of fixing it. Thank you, Joe. She took the paper bag and looked inside. Whew. Billy, are you sure? Mom, you've eaten eels. You ate eels last summer on Long Island. These are just smaller. They're the same thing. Well, she put the paper back in the refrigerator. I guess if Dr. McGrath says it's all right now, why don't you go outside? I wouldn't go across the street with those finks, said Billy. They can. Yeah, shouted Alan. Well, who'd want to go anywhere with you either? Yeah, shouted Billy. Boys, cried Mrs. Forster. Stop it. All right, Alan and Joe, you'd better go. The screen door banged behind them, said Billy scornfully. Joe's face appeared in the screen. Thanks for saying you'll help out, Mrs. Forster. What's for dinner? Said Billy's father, coming into the kitchen. Well, said Billy's mother, you and I and Emily are having hamburgers and string beans and mashed potatoes. Billy is having a fried worm. More worms? The bet's still on? Look, she took a small plate covered with saran wrap out of the refrigerator. And you've eaten 9 of these already, Billy? He poked the worms curiously. What do? Use a lot of ketchup and mustard? Billy nodded. And horseradish and other things, and we fry them. Billy's father lifted a corner of the saran wrap and smelled the worms. Helen, you ought to be able to do better than fried. Use your cookbook. I am not a cook. I am just a referee. Oh, come on. Think of it as a challenge. He took a cookbook from the shelf under the spice rack. Let's see. Mastering the Art of French Cooking. He leafed through the cookbook. Here, how about poached eels on toast? No, said Billy's mother. It calls for chopping up the eel in little pieces, and that would be against the rules. How about spaghetti with worm balls then? Or a savory worm pie, creamed worms on toast, Spanish worm loaf with mushroom sauce? Wait, said Billy's mother, putting down her cooking spoon. It might just... She took the cookbook and turned to the index. Here, she read. Alsatian smothered worm. Dredge the worm with seasoned flour. Saute in 3 tablespoon drippings until brown. Cover with sliced onions. Pour over 1 cup thick sour cream. Cover pot closely and bake in a slow oven until tender. Bravo, said Billy's father. Put the hamburgers back in the refrigerator. We'll all have worms tonight. I won't, said Emily. Ha, said Billy, grinning in the midst of chewing. Boy, Alan and Joe thought they were doing me in when they came to you, Mom. But this is better than a steak. It really tastes good. Yuck, muttered Emily, making a face. Let me have a taste, said Billy's father. No, said his mother. Billy has to eat every bite himself. Alan and Joe were very firm about that, and I'm the referee. Boy, said Billy, I don't mind if it tastes like this. The 11th worm. How'd you do it, said Billy. What's it called? My word, said his father. Gosh, Mrs. Forster, gasped Tom. On a silver dish in front of Billy lay an ice cream cake bathed in fruit syrups, peach, cherry, tutti frutti, candied orange, topped with whipped cream, sprinkled with jelly beans and almond slivers. It's called Whiz Bang Worm Delight, said Billy's mother proudly. I made it up. Is the worm really in there? Said Billy, poking about with his spoon, and then scraping away a bit of whipped cream at one end. He glimpsed the worm's snout protruding from the center of the cake. Snug as a bug in a rug, said his mother. I still wouldn't eat a worm, said Emily, eyeing the whiz-bang worm delight with envious distaste. I would, said Tom. At least maybe I would. It won't work. Look, said Joe, even if he remembers the worm while we're at Shay's, he can't get one. Where's anyone going to find a worm at Shea Stadium? Don't worry, we'll say you've won. We'll find a worm after we get home, and we keep right on stuffing him. Peanuts, hot dogs, hamburgers, Cracker Jacks, ice cream, orange soda, gum, Mars bars. You know how he loves to eat. You ever seen him refuse something to eat? By the time we start home, he'll be bloated, drowsy, belching. Remember the last time when his father took us? He was asleep by the time we hit Peekskills. Your father will carry him in from the car. His mother and father will put him to bed. Next morning, he'll wake up too late. You've won. 15 worms in 15 days. He missed a day. Alan gnawed at his thumbnail. What about Tom? We'll ask him along and then just not pick him up. We can tell your father and Billy that Tom's mother called. He was sick. His grandmother died. Anything. Just so we don't have to bring him with us. Alan sighed. Geez, it'll probably cost me $8 just to buy all that food. Cracker Jacks, hamburgers. Yeah, but it'll cost you $50 if he wins. Yeah, well, geez. How'd I ever get into this? If my father finds out. Alan slumped on the porch steps, gazing down at his sneakers, gnawing his thumbnail. Come on, said Joe, slapping him on the shoulder. Cheer up. You haven't lost yet. Go ask your father.